I think when most people think of restorative practices, they think of more of the restorative discipline piece. We often forget about the upfront work involved in restorative practices. To me, it's more about systems work. It's about creating a climate and a culture where the practices of restorative practices actually can happen. I would define it more as part of community building, relationship building, providing skills to connect with youth so that when harm and conflict happen, we can handle that in a way that isn't based in shame. It's not based in stigma. It's based in agency for that youth, collaboration with everybody involved, and coming up with a solution that keeps a kiddo connected and feeling like they still belong to that school community. That's my definition of restorative practices.
Welcome to Nobody's Perfect, a community built to support, inspire, and empower youth and families everywhere. Our mission is to break down stigma and offer solutions to the mental health and well-being challenges we all can face. Nobody's Perfect is a podcast and a movement powered by the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Arapahoe and Douglas counties. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and today we're diving into a thought-provoking conversation about restorative practices with youth. My guest is Zac Hess. Zac is a dedicated educator and youth advocate with a diverse background in leadership and service. A graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, he served as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and company commander in the U.S. Army before transitioning to public education in 2006. Over 16 years, Zac has worked as a teacher, dean, assistant principal, and district administrator, focusing on the root causes of student challenges in learning, behavior, and mental health. He has led the implementation of restorative practices, multi-tiered systems of support, trauma response practices, and social emotional learning with a prevention-based approach. Now Zac applies his expertise in coalition building with strategic programming to help schools create inclusive, supportive environments where all students can thrive. Zac, it's a pleasure to have you here today. I'm so glad you can join us on the Nobody's Perfect community.
I'm so excited, Jason. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, as we were prepping for this call, like repeatedly, everybody said, you've got to have Zac on to talk about restorative practices. That sounds like an interesting, cool thing. Like before we even start the conversation, tell us what it is.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question, right? So the restorative practices, I think when most people think of restorative practices, they think of more of the restorative discipline piece, which means, well, we're not suspending or expelling kiddos, right? And so that's kind of where we get, that's also one of the, I think, issues of implementing it, but that's probably where people kind of sit in. And if it's not just the discipline piece, then they think about circles and doing kind of, connection circles and just safe spaces for students to talk about things and resolve harm and conflict. And so now that is a huge element of restorative practices. I think what I found though throughout my work with schools and school districts trying to implement something like this, we often forget about the upfront work involved in restorative practices. So if I was to define restorative practices, and my definition would be really an alignment and a connection to social emotional learning, trauma informed practices, all fitting within that multi-tiered system of support. So to me, it's more about systems work. It's about creating a climate and a culture where the practices of restorative practices actually can happen, because a lot of times we'll try these things, but the groundwork, the foundation isn't there, and they fail, and people get frustrated, and I understand that. So I would define it more as part of community building, relationship building, providing skills to connect with youth so that when harm and conflict happen, we can handle that in a way that isn't based in shame. It's not based in stigma. It's based in agency for that youth, collaboration with everybody involved, and coming up with a solution that keeps a kiddo connected and feeling like they still belong to that school community. That's my definition of restorative practices.
I love that. And what I'm hearing from you is it sounds like it's really community focused and it's really based on addressing conflict really before conflict escalates to something that is much harder to reel back. Like I can imagine, that approach done thoughtfully and tailored in a school system really has some positive benefit. In your experience of doing the work that you do and somebody that guides this work, how have you seen it transform school culture or foster a sense of belonging among students?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've seen that. And I've seen the results of that when they've done it very explicitly as, like you said, that kind of community approach and really thinking about it as, if we're gonna do this work, people say, well, this is like, turning a ship. Well, restorative practices to me is more like turning a navy. Like it's like a lot of stuff going on. And if you simplify it too much, then things get lost. So if you approach it with some of that systems thinking and aligning, then one of the benefits is school districts find that they are meeting goals and objectives and meeting needs that they've identified. Also, using restorative practices because it's connected to that, right? We'll have a school that's like, we're going to dig into social emotional learning. Great, right? We got to really improve the mental health of our kids. Awesome, right? Like all really good things. But sometimes school districts will try to take those, piecemeal. And it's like, we have a SEL initiative, and now we have a trauma informed initiative, and now we have a mental health suicide prevention initiative. We heard about this restorative practices thing. That's going to be great. And that is so overwhelming to staff and districts, right? So again, when it's done in this way of aligning those practices, then it's such a load off, and it's like, killing two birds with one stone. And I think that's a huge impact. I think the other impact, I can give you a great example of just shifting the trajectory for youth when harm and conflict happen, because the reality of it is harm and conflict always happen. We're adults and we create harm and conflict consistently. We have some tools in our toolbox after years to try to navigate that a little better, but our youth don't. Right. And so instead of shaming and punishing and excluding them, right, we give them these practices, and we have this system that actually gives them that sense of agency, like, okay, I messed up, but I'm not a bad human. Like I'm still a good person, right? And I am giving some structure and some support by trusted adults, right, to navigate this. And I'm going to be a part of the solution. And that feels good to everybody, right? So, the example I was going to share is there's three girls in one of these rural school districts that got caught vaping THC, right?
Okay.
And when they investigated it, right, and they did this process that we kind of defined, and it's all based in restorative, they found through screening that two of them had a pretty significant substance use disorder. Like you would qualify under DSM-5, right? Like they had a substance use disorder. One of them not as much. Then they did more digging, they found out why, and there was some deep stuff, some trauma-related things, some things happening in the family, just some things that normally, if you just suspend a kid because they take vape THC, you're not gonna know any of that information. And instead of excluding these girls, these three girls, and shaming them and making them feel bad about themselves, which, by the way, they already did because of the events that were going on in their life, they surrounded them with a bunch of trusted adults. They identified the root cause of the problem. They started addressing it. They got some more counseling and some more positive supports for them. They kept them engaged in school and the positive things they were, like volleyball, one of them, right? Band, and another. They didn't kick them out of those things. Those were protective factors to keep these kids engaged. They didn't miss out on their education. They didn't lose credits. These are all high school girls. They didn't, none of those things, but they were still held accountable because they had to create a plan on how they were going to fix it, how they were going to get involved, their dedication to this, right? Parents were involved, counselors were involved, teachers were involved. Like literally in my mind, like three young girls' lives that were saved, and instead of getting involved in law enforcement, being possibly even expelled, losing credits, and all of these things at such at 16 years old, right? They were like held accountable, but they're still gonna thrive and they're getting the help they need. So that to me, like, I don't know, that I've seen that kind of power so often.
Well, and I love that example because what it really feels like to me is it's rooted in this sense of community. There are a lot of people involved in ensuring we're showing up to support these young women. And the reality is what you've just outlined for us as an example, it's really moving beyond the punitive and into the supportive and recognizing that from this person-centered approach, we're really seeing what you're struggling with, and we're trying to solve that problem instead of giving you detention or expelling you or putting you on suspension. And the reality is based on what you've just shared, all of those actions, which historically is how things have been done, probably would have led to further addiction, further usage, gosh knows what else. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's a tremendous step forward in how we approach some of these things that our youth are facing.
Oh, yeah, I joke all the time, I'm like, "Okay, good idea. Let's suspend the kid for 3 days that's been vaping so that they can go home, unsupervised, play Xbox, and get high." Sounds like a great strategy because 'cause I'm sure after that 3-day suspension, they're gonna come back and be like, "I'm all cured." Like come on, sometimes we gotta use some common sense, really, and think about things a little deeper, and I think restorative practices, what that does is it gives you some structure. So I understand, especially for some people, like, that structure is important, right? Like, this is new, I don't really understand it, and I need some things, that I can follow, if you will, and it helps build that confidence of doing some things, right? So, I think that's why this can be so powerful, because I think when you put it like that, most people are like, "Yeah, no, that's not a really good idea. I understand, sending him home to unsupervised to get high is probably not gonna solve the problem." Yeah, right?
Right, and you have parents that really probably are not well attuned to know how to deal with the problem either, so ultimately, other people are gonna need to be involved to solve the problem. It sounds like this circumvents that. The question that is coming up for me, aside from this tremendous system of support that is created through this practice is, what is the accountability on the student side? Like, how has that been received? I mean, you gave us this great example here. Is there reluctance? Is there an unwillingness to buy into that? Like, how are you seeing students take that on once this is being utilized?
That's great. I mean, and that goes to this point of the foundational work, right? Because so much of this is based in relationships and authenticity and trust, right? If Jason, if you and I don't know each other and I'm telling you, now, Jason, lay it all out there, what's going on? You're gonna be like, who the heck are you, Zach?
Right.
Why would I share this? Every other adult in my life is used that information to hammer me, right? Like, why would I do this, right? And so that's why that upfront work of building this connection and that trust, then they know this is authentic. So I would say that in schools where the first thing is we're just going to do this restorative discipline stuff, it's a hard sell. It's very difficult because there isn't that trust, and youth are youth, and especially if you've made some mistakes, or you've created some harm and conflict in the past, and you have in your brain as a young person, okay, I know it's going to happen, right? I'm going to get called down to the office. I'm going to get suspended. My mom and dad are going to be angry. I'll probably be grounded for 6 months. They're going to lose their stuff. I mean, like, who knows what happens in the home? It could be really bad, right? And so then why would I come to you, Jason, and just confess to all that? Right. And not even than that, let's look at our society. What examples do we have of adults actually just owning and taking responsibility when they've done something wrong?
Well, I was
Like,
gonna say, as we're talking this applicable to youth, this really feels like a people thing. Like, there any
well,
one of us could fall into the categories of I've made some bad decisions and I don't wanna talk about it.
right, and for fear of, like, the huge, massive consequences, and so, like, cop pulls you over for speeding, if you're speeding or not, but what? No, what? Yeah, I wasn't speeding, officer. Yeah, it was, right? But I don't wanna pay a $250 ticket. So, right, and so I think that is one of the barriers, and that's why I really when I go into school districts and talk about this, and into communities and talk about this, that's why I say we gotta build that foundation, we gotta make sure that we're really concentrating first and foremost on building those relationships and places of trust and treating people with dignity, right? What I was licensed in my initial work in restorative practices, they talked about the 5 R's, they're all really good, but they one of the R's was respect. Now, as I got into trauma and mental health and I studied more and started learning more about that, I was like, huh, interesting. Why would I assume a young person that's gone through a lot of adverse childhood experiences, why would I think they would inherently trust or respect an adult? Just because 'cause they're up in front of the classroom? Just because they occupy an office in the school building? Like, nah, man. The adults in those youth's lives don't deserve respect, right? And so you go through it, and that's a personal story of mine. You're growing up with 5 plus adverse childhood experiences. My relationship with adults was difficult. I didn't have a lot of trust, and I pushed back a lot, and I'm sure many of my teachers would go back and say, "Oh, Zach, he's kind of disrespectful." I was like, "Kinda." I definitely was. I pushed back. I didn't just respect them because they were my teacher, because that wasn't my experience. My experience was like I had to fend for myself, do my thing, and adults got in my way and made things unsafe, right?
Sure.
So, I look at that lens, And how can I expect a kiddo to come in and authentically really engage and say, Jason, I did this, I own it, I take responsibility, and I am willing and I want to make things right. That doesn't happen unless we've built a relationship and there's trust and they know that that's exactly how it's going to go. And it's not going to be flipped on them, right? It's predictable. We know in trauma, right? One of the biggest things for felt safety is that predictability piece. And so that's what restorative practices gives. If you've set the foundation, then they are very receptive because they know they're going to come see Mr. Hess in the office. They've done this before. They understand how it works at that school. And so they come in and they'll be like, I can't. I mean, the number of times a kiddo would come in to me and be like, I know, Hess, I know I'm here. I, I can't believe I did. I'm so sorry. Like, I, let's, I'll make it right. Like I didn't have, I'm just like, I didn't have to do anything. Right. Instead of when I first started and I didn't know this stuff, it was a fight. I was like, dude, I got camera right here.
Right.
That ain't me. It is you. It's you're on camera. I'm like, so it shifts it completely. And the other piece of that is like, I don't have to own the conflict as the adult. That's a lot of pressure. I felt it when I was starting out. Like, I got to come up with the perfect consequence and make him learn, and it's gonna stick, and whatever, right? And in restorative, when you give that student agency and they feel like they're involved in this, I mean, the solutions that these youth come up with, profound. Like, I'm not lying. Like, there's some of them I just sit back and be like, I would have never thought of that. That is beautiful.
Choose your own adventure here.
Yeah. And they just do an amazing job.
What I love about it, is again, I go back to people centric, and we've talked about trusted adults a lot in these podcasts that we've done. And the thing to recognize if you're a parent that's listening is, the parents are not always the trusted adults by the example that you've given, you know, in your own home growing up. I mean, the reality is the foundation of this that I think is so important is recognizing that it's really building relationship from this place of trust and respect. And then that leads to these conflict resolution conversations that really kind of transcend the he said, she said thing into let me move into taking accountability. Like, I can imagine there's real power in doing that as an educator working with youth, but I'm also imagining that has real power just in how the educators that are becoming trusted adults and leadership and administrators in schools, how they're communicating with each other. Like, on the flip side, what have you seen that utilizing these practices has really done to kind of create a different culture within schools from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And that, again, going to this point that it is a community, right?
Right.
it is shifting the whole Navy. Like, everybody gets on board with this. And once everybody gets on board with it and models it, and the community understands it, parents understand it, then it goes forward. I think from the adult perspective, I did a lot of this, and I was very fortunate to be trusted to do this. Like, our HR department would say, "Hey, we have this conflict at this school. We got a couple of staff. We've got a department that's not getting along together. There's some things going on. Like, do you think you could maybe help with that before it gets to be like this official thing? We got to put in records and all that kind of silly stuff, right?" And I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is a really, to me, a good process for letting people deal with conflict. And I know you know this, Jason. And I'm sure people have talked about this, but like right now, whatever reason, our ability to handle conflict is it's hard. Like, I don't know that people really truly know how to handle conflict very well, and as adults, we don't often model it very well, and the youth see that, and they see it in school. So I would always joke that I would hardly ever know if two of my staff members were mad at each other, but I'd have a youth come up to me and say, "Hess, Smith and Allen up there, I'm telling you what, man, something's going on." I'll be like, "Oh, brother, I better go check it out," right?
Right.
They see it, they know it, they hear it, right? And so I would go in, back to that with the HR piece, I would go back in and do these restorative practices. Mediation, a lot of people call it like a restorative mediation or restorative conferencing. But just giving folks the opportunity to talk to each other and deal with their conflict in a structured, safe place. And that was my job as the facilitator. I didn't do a lot of the talking, right? I would prompt, I would do my upfront meetings with them to make sure, one, that this was voluntary, one, that they wanted to do this. Two, that there was some responsibility taking. Like they were willing to see that this wasn't like this cut and dry thing, that there was some stuff happening in the middle there, right? And as long as they could acknowledge that, and and just making sure after I interviewed everybody that would be involved that this is going to be safe, right? They're going to have a lot of nerves and it's going to be kind of scary. I get that. But that's my job as the facilitator to make sure they feel comfortable, they feel safe, and that I'm going to manage this conversation so it doesn't turn into the Jerry Springer show, right? That's what I, I'd say that as like, that's my job, right? And I will stop you and I will refocus if we need to. If we get too emotional and we're not using the right kind of language and we're being very, accusatory of one, that's my job. And I can tell you without a doubt, I didn't everyone that I said would kind of deem, yes, this will be a great opportunity. Those things they were wonderful, beautiful conversations because people really are pretty awesome. And I think people really do have big hearts and people do want to resolve conflict. It's just scary, right? There's so many things that goes into that psychological safety piece of everything, right? To get into a conflict and be able to handle it between two people, and there's so many layers of what's going on, our own experiences, our own everything, our own bias, our own all of that, right? And then, gosh, to do that sometimes it's really hard. But when you have someone kind of using these restorative practices to do that, it's structured, it's safe, and people have a chance to voice their needs, their frustrations, their emotions, and then the focus of them together coming up with a solution. Not me telling them. I'm not HR telling you, you will do this and you will do this and that's it, right? No, it's like how what are you gonna do? And you don't have to be best buds drinking beers on Friday night. I don't care, but like, can we work together and be respectful? What's the you
Well,
know?
I think in conflict in general, I mean, there's 2 things, one that's coming up. One, it feels like collectively we're a pot that's about to boil over, and we're being inundated with all of these external conflicts day in and day out that we absolutely have 0 control over. The reality is having tools like this on board, that really helps to bring the temperature down on some of these things. But I think so many of the things that we get worked up about and don't resolve is really our own internal dialogue around, I can't control the narrative and I don't know how this is going to turn out.
Oh,
So, what that looks like is we spin out internally, and that continues to create not only this internal conflict and often external conflict, but it's this negative cycle that really doesn't get you out of driving around the same 5 houses in the cul-de-sac very quickly, you know?
sure. Absolutely. Well, we also know, right, a basic human need is control, right? That autonomy and that agency. We gotta know that I have the skills that I can handle this. And when you don't, or you feel like it's completely out of your control, that is such an we know, like, by the research, and you know this better than I do, but like, as far as mental health goes, that is a huge, huge thing that really harms people's sense of self and their own mental health and all that. And that's why, like, again, as adults, it's hard for us. And we actually have a lot of control over our lives. Like, there's definitely an exercise we could all do to figure out what I'm in control of, what I could influence, and what's out of my control, right? There's a lot of power in being able to do that. But when we look at our youth, the amount of control they have over their lives is like slim, right? And, as teenagers, absolutely. I have a 16-year-old daughter. Let me tell you, she's trying to figure out how much control she can have, right? And that's normal. It's
With a
developed.
dad that does restorative practices pretty well.
Yeah, I think she might say, Dad, you teach this stuff, right? Yeah. Anyway, I do. On a good day, I'm really good. I'm really good. Um, but yeah, this is this is the part I try to tell, our staff and our districts when we talk about mental health. We know that autonomy and that control that they have, shared decision making, is really impactful for a youth's mental health. When you give them some sense of control, then that's a protective factor, right? Against all the things that are coming in at them. So with restorative practices, we're doing that because guess what? They're gonna cause harm. They're gonna cause conflict. My goodness gracious, they are young people, right? And so this is going to happen. And we have schools with hundreds of adults and children, thousands of children, all in. Like, are you kidding me? We're not gonna have harm and conflict. Of course we are. So let's do it in a way, right? That involves people, that actually there's learning, and it's helping with their mental health, like they're coming back to us, back into these classrooms where they feel welcomed and like they belong, like, so powerful for the healing to happen. And when you don't do that, it just leaves this ick.
Right, and what I really love is it kind of level sets from the jump that we are going to resolve this, or our efforts are going to lead us to an outcome that hopefully is successful for everybody involved. Whether we all like the outcome or not, we're not discussing that necessarily, but I mean, it is leading towards a solution, hopefully, that we can all live with. The thing that I'm curious about, and this sounds like a really wonderful tool that anybody would apply, but, being that we have such diverse, populations these days, like, is this a system that is equitable and inclusive of everybody, as we integrate it into school systems?
Yeah, I believe so, and I try to coach districts in ways. How do you make a circle inclusive? But that's again part of building community in your classroom. How do you build community in your classroom when you have 30 diverse kids in there with diverse backgrounds, the ethnicities and abilities to learn and all these things, right? Some of that same messaging and same kind of work we got to do, right, for restorative practice to happen. What I think makes it equitable is like this is how we do business. And it's not a discipline matrix. I think some people are like, well, this is equitable because it was the first offense and it's a suspension of 3 days. It's the second suspense and it's a da 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 da. That may be equitable, but what that is not doing is all the other stuff we've been talking about, right? There's not accountability. It's not learning. It's not supporting. It's not loving. It's not, the sense of belonging and all these things, right? And so the restorative practices, does do that. It gives us equitable opportunities to treat our students with dignity, right? Meaning that their self-worth is a given. And so we're going to take the time and energy to dig a little. We're gonna shift our mindset, right, from this shaming, stigma type of tit for tat, you harm me, so you're gonna feel the pain kind of thing. We're shifting our mindset to one of, I'm curious, I need to dig into this, and I can ask some simple questions to everybody to try to get to some understanding and follow this process to see where it goes. But here's the thing, Jason, we do know that there's all kinds of different students at all kinds of different levels, right? Uh, Emotionally, socially, educationally, like whatever experiences, things going on. Um, and so I'm very clear, like this is not magic pixie dust, right? You don't just sprinkle it in your ventilation system and everybody's like, oh, and things are great. It has to be part of a system. And you have to look at it in that multi-tiered kind of approach because if it doesn't like, if you try to do some of these things and it doesn't fit, right? Let's say you're gonna do a mediation and a student refuses to take accountability for whatever reasons. Well, I'm not you don't force a mediation between two people. If you and I were in conflict and someone was gonna mediate it and they said, "Zach, do you wanna meet with Jason and talk this out?" I'm like, "No, I can't stand the guy. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Why would I? No, I'm not doing that." Well, then what's the next step? So if you don't have this system, right? Okay, then this is the thing that we're gonna do, or this is how we're gonna support it. Um, it takes time, and I think that's a shift too, is the biggest thing I'll talk to people about is, what's the barrier to this? I ask all the when I do trainings, so what's the barrier? Time, time, time. Yeah, it is. It takes more time. Absolutely. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it at all. I can suspend a kid in 5 minutes. I might have to work with a kid for a couple days to figure out this conflict. Now, I can't make that worth it for you. Right? That's the mindset shift. It has to either be a priority and important to you to do this work. Um,
Well, it sounds like it needs to be a buy-in on a much broader scale.
right.
I guess my question is, I mean, I know restorative practices really aims to reduce disciplinary actions in the kind of the traditional ways that we've done it. And you gave us the example earlier of the young ladies using, THC vape pens. Like, how have you seen that? I mean, because obviously there are still situations that come up that I'm assuming need more punitive disciplinary action. How have you seen this? How does that work in that construct? Because I'm guessing this is not always 100%, like, we're gonna resolve this and everybody's gonna go on and be happy.
Wouldn't that be awesome? If I had that, I'd be a billionaire and, whatever. We'd be doing this on my yacht.
Right.
Yeah, no. Uh, and and I guess I think one accepting that and understanding that is okay. So I again, to be fair, I'm not going to tell anybody this is the magic thing that pill take it and everything. No, like there's certain things by state statute, right? Like things that you have to expel a kiddo on. You do. They bring a weapon into school, and that's an automatic expulsion. I've had to expel kids for distributing drugs, for bringing in a weapon into school. I've had to suspend kids for certain, reasons, needed time to create safety plan. Like there's that. And so it doesn't I'm not saying I'm never gonna advocate that you just throw it all out, like you're never gonna do these. Those are tools that you're gonna have to have, and some of them by statute you're gonna have to have. But I think there is a restorative way of doing that. And there's a punitive way of doing that, right? And an example, a student brought a weapon into school, and so that's an automatic, super scary, right? That is super scary, um, and everybody is like, "Ooh," right? Like it's rough, right? Now I could have easily, right? We could have got law enforcement charged out of there, doing these kind of things, and they'd have gone to the foot center or wherever they're going to be, and all of that is going to, and probably some of that's going to happen anyway. But I could have just left it there and not done anything, not have been curious at all to maybe see what was the motivation, what was lacking, like what were the things that we were missing. Because I'll tell you in the instance, and luckily this happened when after I'd been doing restorative practices for quite a while and felt very comfortable with it, is this understanding and working with the student to figure out what was going on. And you know what was going on is this kiddo was being bullied by like 4 to 5 kids relentlessly, physically under a stairwell that I felt horrible. Like, I'm supposed to be walking the building. Like, I took a lot of responsibility. Like, how did I not notice this was happening? Right. And there's things now online and social media, right? All these things that are happening. But I would never have uncovered any of that kind of stuff. I would have never at least let that kid have a little bit of voice in this and and be able to share like this is why I'm not a horrible human. I was super unsafe. I was being bullied. I didn't know what else to do, right? Now you could take that and be like, "That's it. That's against the law. You're bye-bye." Or you could what me and my staff did is look at it and differently and go, "What did we miss? Like, how did we not understand that? How come this kiddo didn't have a trusted adult in the building to go tell?" I always thought that was me. I was like, I know I'm the dean and all that, and I'm like in charge of discipline, but I thought I had relationships with I thought the kid, right, I had to really take a really look inside and be like, why was this the thing? And it doesn't excuse the action, right? It's totally unacceptable. You don't get to do that, and there's but we did this, and we had a formal conference, we brought parents and grandparents in, we brought the other teachers. Oh, by the way, when we found out about what was going on, we did the interviews and did that with those boys, their parents. We brought everybody together to understand that their actions have consequences. These boys that did the bullying got to really see firsthand what happens, right? And they took accountability. They were part of solutions. Like, again, they weren't shamed either, right? Because kids do things. We weren't happy with them. Like, you know what I mean? But like, it wasn't, they weren't bad people. They were making some bad decisions. They were seventh grade boys, right? Like, I don't know. It's like, okay, you made some mistakes and we're going to and did it take a lot of time? Uh-huh. Yeah, it took a long time.
Right.
But we did this process. The boy was still charged. He was expelled, but we did it in a way that I hope, I don't know, I haven't followed up, right? This was a long time ago, but I hope that that it affected him in somewhere where he didn't feel so much shame, you know, and so badly about himself that he couldn't recover from something that he did in 7th grade.
What I really love about this, and I actually got goosebumps as you were telling that story about the value and the importance of this, again, people-centric, I see you approach. I'm guessing, and again, by your own admission, you haven't followed up to know exactly the outcome. I'm guessing you made a pivot in the examples you gave in each of those young men's lives that likely was so important in where they became in high school and college and adult life. Like, really, there are so many pivot points in life that if somebody just saw you in that moment and a different choice was made and a different direction was taken, it can change everything.
Everything. Right? We've all like, there's sometimes I look back and I'm like, "Oh my god, thank god I just wasn't caught." Right?
Right. And I think we all have those examples. I mean, I published a book this last year, and I think to myself, like, part of the storytelling in that, we all have a chapter we don't want read out loud. For you and I, those chapters happened before everybody had a phone filming everything, which is really great. But in today's world, and I really do think that technology has contributed a lot of these things because everybody's a news reporter now, 24/7, 365. We've got a phone, we've got a camera, and we're memorializing all of these chapters that we wouldn't necessarily want read out loud. And I think the pressure of being a youth today in those circumstances feels palpable and it's scary.
It
And
is.
it's not just youth, it's adults also. And we are living our lives from a highlight reel. We're only seeing the best examples. But the fact of the matter is, there are all of these things that are happening behind the scenes that really have significant impact on who we are and how we show up in the world.
Yeah, I mean, think of it, like, most people, if you have a family and you have children, you as a and then they're in their, like, teens or they're really starting to, like, start to do some of these things, like, we navigated that just like you said, without so we don't even have the skills to help them navigate because we don't have our experience to draw on, right?
Well, I say as adults, we are adaptives to technology and we're trying to train natives. And the disconnect there, I hear from parents all the time, like, I want to monitor what my kid is doing, but I don't know what they know. Like, they're 10 steps ahead of me. And again, I don't think that's a criticism. I think it's just the world that we're evolving into. And the fact of the matter is, I think parents are equally scared. So when you talk about practices like this, like, really having tools that can help with the foundation of communication. I don't care who you are, how you're implementing or what season of life you're implementing it into. Like, it has real power to make a difference in what happens next and next and next.
And next. I 100% believe it, and I think that would be my one like, again, is it hard? Yes. So anybody out there listening is like, "I'm gonna do restorative practices." Zac Hess says, "This is hard, and it takes a long time to build the foundation and expect something good to happen, your impact in 2 to 4 years." Right? Do not think you're gonna implement this in 9 months of a school year, which, by the way, it wouldn't be because it'd be, September, October when you get around to it, and then, you take the whole month of April out, and then right, like, like, you don't have a so it's gonna take time, and but when you take the time and you do invest in that, you will see the results of it. This team that I'm talking about is only year 2 in it, dude. That was with the 3 girls that were vaping THC. They've embraced it, and they're so wonderful. Jason, they're, like, just so brave and courageous, like, "We're gonna do this, Zach, like, just help us, like, figure this," and I'm like, "Yeah," and they've done it. They're making environmental change by changing their policy. We're year 2 in, right? And they've already changed the trajectory. I guarantee you the trajectory of these 3 young ladies, right? And all the other ones that they're doing, but this was just the most relevant, like, cool story that I was just like, "This is so." I'm so proud of them for, like, taking this leap. If you take the leap and you dig in and you do this stuff and you build the foundation, you do this in phased implementation, you align it to your other things, and take time to do that, the outcomes, you will absolutely be amazed.
And I have no doubt, and I wanna reiterate, or make clear, the example that you've given us of these 3 young women, they're not outliers. Those stories are by the hundreds, take your pick in what school you're going into.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, I mean, we do have a generation of kids that, in many respect, are in crisis in one way or the other, and creating this culture of respect and trust and "I see you" is so necessary and valuable. I guess as a wrap up, being that not every school district has a Zach Hess to come in or, to train them. Like, if I'm a parent or a caregiver or somebody that is, instrumental in guiding a youth's life today, where do I go to learn more about this practice and these tools and how I could implement them in my own life?
Yeah, there really are a lot of amazing organizations. I mean, even in Colorado here that do this work. They do community work. Some are really they concentrate on doing it in schools. Some concentrate on doing it in the community, like in justice reform and social justice and that kind of thing. They do a lot of this stuff with people that are victims of crime and those involved in crime, and they do a lot of this work. And so you could actually probably Google like restorative practices and see organizations, but like one of the leading ones that does the restorative justice, like kind of an overall, is RJ Colorado. They have a lot of good resources. I could recommend cool books like Better Than Carrots and Sticks. It's an easy read. It just kind of does some nice like overview of everything. I've done book studies with staff on that one, and they really like it.
Okay.
Um, International Institute of Restorative Practices, they're one of big leaders in this work. Um, and like, I don't know, they can look on, I think RJ Colorado actually has a map of different organizations. So you like in your area that you could contact about this. What I would recommend is as people look at these resources, just really making sure that they're doing it in their context. So like, me coming into, I don't know, like a judicial district or something and saying, I'm gonna like, I don't know if I'm the right guy for that, right? Because I've done my experience has been more around schools, and then vice versa. If some people are way into, you know, restorative justice and working in that community, is that the best into your school? So just making sure that you're putting in the work to learn from each other. And like, I like this person, I like their approach. We need to get them, on board and understanding our community within this school district to be able to do it. Cause that's so important. It's another, lesson learned of bringing in, sometimes you bring in contractors. And we've done this before and brought them in, and it doesn't resonate because they're not part of that community. And we did a contract and we didn't do enough work to set those things up to really inform them, let them understand, let them learn more, and learning the context of what's going to really work. So, I don't know, like in the
Well, I think
prevention.
a cultural fit is really important in doing anything, especially work like this. But, Zach, I am so appreciative of the information you've given us today and the time that you've taken to, instruct and guide these practices. I know anybody who's been under your tutelage is better because of it. So thank you. Um, one question that I always have to ask my guests before we leave: what does this question, "Nobody's perfect," mean to you?
Oh, talk about how that aligns the restorative practices, right? No, we're human. I wanna create a t-shirt that says because we're human, right? Like, we make mistakes. We're not perfect. We cause harm. We're not perfect. I did that as a youth. I do it as an adult, right? But do we all deserve dignity? Do we all deserve to belong and feel accepted? Yes, that is a given, right? And this rhetoric and all this stuff out there about like trying to separate and make feel people feel less than is like that's not okay, right? And shifting our mindset to that, I love it that nobody's perfect. That opens up things to be curious, to dig a little, to take some time and to figure out what's making this person tick. Why did these mistakes happen? Why were these actions? Why did the harm and conflict happen? And let's dig in because nobody's perfect. So it takes time. So let's put in the time.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Zach, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. That was my pleasure. This was a blast.
Absolutely. And thank you for being part of the Nobody's Perfect community dedicated to supporting, inspiring, and empowering youth and families. We hope you've enjoyed today's transformative conversation. Together, we're dismantling stigma and providing solutions for mental health and well-being challenges so everyone can thrive. Join us on YouTube or your favorite streaming platform to continue embracing our shared human experience. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, visit nobodysperfect.community to get immediately connected to a hub of clinically approved mental health resources and tools designed to support you wherever you find yourself on your journey. And be sure to follow us at Nobody's Perfect Community on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and it's been a pleasure having you here. Stay connected, stay inspired, and remember, nobody's perfect because perfection isn't real. Your story is. Until next time.